Hello, my name is Nancy Caruso. I'm a marine biologist and the founder of Get Inspired, and I want to share a story with you about our kelp forests and a new threat to this most valuable ecosystem along our coast, which is actually invisible to most people. I've spent the last 18 years restoring Orange County's kelp forest ecosystem through community-based projects that involve kids growing the species that I'm actually restoring and volunteer divers helping me to do the restoration work underwater. I spent 10 years from 2002 to 2012 restoring the kelp forests of Orange County, which were gone for 2 decades. And I've been working on restoring white sea bass, green abalone, and pismo clams ever since. I've been monitoring our kelp forests since we completed the restoration, and I've noticed something very interesting that I want to share with you. But first, some background on why all of this is important. Globally, kelp forests are found in only a few temperate locations. They have a huge biomass, meaning that they grow very dense and very tall, up to 150 feet tall. They're like underwater forests. They produce oxygen, they sequester carbon, which has become increasingly important to us as excess carbon dioxide is building in our atmosphere. Healthy, thriving kelp forests can also help mitigate ocean acidification. Kelp forests protect shorelines from erosion, and they are the foundation of our entire coastal ecosystem in California. More than 800 species rely on kelp. Lobsters, sea bass, abalone, seals, sea lions, sheephead, kelpfish, and us, humans. We rely on kelp forests too. If oxygen or carbon uptake and protection from erosion and food from the kelp forest doesn't excite you, take a look at all these products that are manufactured with alginate in them. Well, alginate comes from kelp. Everybody loves Taco Bell cheese dip, right? From the late 1970s until about 1983, there was a consistent loss of kelp forest density in Southern California. And by the year 2000, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife reported up to 80% of the kelp forests had been lost in the Southern California Bight. That's the area that extends from Santa Barbara to the Mexican border. According to aerial surveys, Orange County has lost as much as 90% of its kelp. But why? It takes a lot of stressors to collapse an ecosystem. Over many decades, humans impacted the coast of Orange County to the point of collapse in our kelp forests. For instance, we paved over all the Earth's surfaces with roads and parking lots and increased the amount of runoff in our ocean, causing increased turbidity or murkiness in the water. High turbidity limits sunlight from getting to the bottom of the ocean. And guess what starts off its life as a microscopic sporophyte at the bottom of the ocean? Kelp! And it needs lots of light for photosynthesis. Kelp can't grow in the deep waters it was once found historically because of increased turbidity along our coast. Sea otters were once plentiful here in Orange County's kelp forests. They played an important role in keeping the food web in balance, but we killed the last sea otter in 1884 in Dana Point, and they're now extinct in this region. One of the sea otter's favorite foods are sea urchins. And guess what sea urchins love to eat? You guessed it, kelp. So when we took away the sea otter and some of the other urchin predators, the urchin populations exploded. With all those pressures on the kelp forests, in 1983, the strongest El Nino event in recorded history took place. Waves pummeled the Orange County coast, taking out the Seal Beach Pier and the Aliso Creek Pier, and ripped the remaining kelp from the reefs. El Nino events are natural. They occur every 10 to 15 years, and they bring warm water to our coast, so the kelp actually doesn't grow well then, and often dies back. And then the big storms rip it from the reefs, resetting the ecosystem, like a forest fire, so that everything gets a fresh chance to compete for space, starting with the pioneer algae. And it's supposed to culminate in a thriving, healthy kelp forest until the next El Nino resets it all again. Well, in 2002, after waiting 2 decades, the kelp had not returned after that El Nino. So I started a kelp restoration project to restore the kelp to Orange County and trained 287 volunteer divers to help me restore it and monitor it. I taught 5,000 kids to grow giant kelp in their classrooms. We taught the kids to grow kelp in these small classroom nurseries. The kids cleaned the kelp and got it to release microscopic spores, which we grew on tiny bathroom tiles and planted them on the reef. And guess what? They grew. It took us 10 years to remove all those sea urchins from the reefs and grow and plant all that kelp, but my volunteers and those 5,000 students and I restored the kelp forests of Orange County for those 800 species that rely on them. We were so happy. Together, we accomplished something that truly changed the world. We've been monitoring the kelp forests since then, keeping an eye on their health, and something has changed. There's an invasive species that has established itself in our kelp forests. It's called Sargassum horneri, or devilweed. Nothing eats it, fish can't swim through it, light can't get through it, and it competes with our native giant kelp for space and light. Sargassum was introduced in 2006 from a ship's ballast in Long Beach Harbor. It lived alongside the kelp for about 6 years. The kelp was successfully outcompeting it for the most part until the disruption events of 2014 through 2017. Do you remember the warm water blob that happened between 2014 and 2015? And the El Nino, which just happened in 2016 and 2017. So we had a big reset on the ecosystem. But there's just one problem. Sargassum is an annual and giant kelp is a perennial. Now, after a big reset of an El Nino, remember the reef is a clean slate and all the native algae would naturally take its place back on the reef. But this time we have an invasive species, Sargassum. And it reproduces first. It reproduces in June and gets to grow all over the reef. So by the time the kelp starts to grow in December through February, there's no space and no light for the tiny microscopic kelp. This is a barren reef covered with Sargassum. Notice that nothing can grow in the understory. Fish can't even swim through it. This is what it's supposed to look like, with healthy kelp forests and a beautiful understory of brown, green, and red algae. So what's the answer to this problem? What do we do about it? Logically, we want to get rid of it, right? Yes, but all of Orange County's reefs are in marine protected areas. They all have different levels of protections. Unfortunately, Sargassum was not here when the MPAs were established. So it's being protected inside the MPAs. This is not logical, but it is the law. So we have to change the regulations to protect our kelp forest ecosystem and all the species in it. This is how conservation gets done. It is the work of small groups of people rallying with the government to demand change, and that changes the world and protects the planet. So now it's your chance to do just that. So I filed a petition with the California Fish and Game Commission to change their regulations. Again, remember, all the reefs in Orange County are in MPAs, so the department won't allow the take of Sargassum anywhere in Orange County. So I've asked for the following regulation changes. Number one, people be allowed to harvest as much sargassum as they want with a fishing license outside of the MPAs. Currently, there's a limit of 10 pounds. So this is just logical. Number 2, to allow for unlimited harvest of sargassum in the Crystal Cove MPA. The department is scared to allow this in the MPAs. So let's start with this one. Because the interesting thing about the Crystal Cove MPA is that it's already legal to take fish, lobster, and sea urchin within this marine protected area. So you effectively can take everything but sargassum. And that's not logical. Number 3, I would like them to allow me to simply do a study on whether or not pulling the sargassum helps the kelp in the Crystal Cove MPA. Believe it or not, the state wouldn't even let me do a controlled study in a 400 square meter plot on whether or not pulling the sargassum helps the kelp. Now I need your help. I need you to write a letter to support my petition and email it to the Fish and Game Commission by the extended deadline now of Friday, December the 4th at noon sharp. They won't accept anything after then. Follow this template. I can also email it to you, but it's on my Facebook page as well. Please be sure to reference the petition number 2020-014 in the subject and in the body of your email too. It need only be a few sentences supporting my petition. We will have to continue the work on this and press the department on the issue, but this is a very good start. Thank you for listening, and thank you for helping to save our kelp. You can contact me, Nancy Caruso, at the following email and website address.